Hi, welcome to another session of Florida's Great Northwest. I'm your host, Larry Sassano, and I have a real special guest today, Amy Miller, the Port Director of the Port of Pensacola. Amy, welcome and thank you for allowing us to take time out of your busy schedule to talk about port activities and what's going on here. And you know, I was here a few weeks ago and you showed me around, and I was so impressed that it came to this, to having an interview with you. So tell us a little bit about your background first, and then we'll get into stuff about the port.
Okay. Well, Larry, first of all, let me thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking time to come share the Port of Pensacola story with your viewers.
Sure.
I'm the Port Director here at the Port of Pensacola. I've been in this position for just under a year at this point. Prior to becoming Port Director, I was the Assistant Port Director for a number of years. I've actually been here at the Port of Pensacola for 12 and a half years. Been in the port industry for a little over 20 at various ports around the Gulf of Mexico, which is an interesting career choice and an interesting trek for a country girl from the middle of Ohio who never even saw the ocean until she was 18 years old. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Well, you know, you shared and asked me to look at the history page on the port's website. And I did that, and I thought, well, how fascinating, the entire history behind this port here. And I have to comment about the fires. I counted 7 fires over the period of time that this port's been active. But tell us about the history of the port.
Pensacola's maritime commercial history is long and distinguished. The early years of what would be considered a port, I suppose, started back in the mid-1700s with the first shipments of product into and out of Pensacola's waterfront. Of course, at that time, it was all private docks, privately owned, privately operated. So the first port authority here actually was formed in the early 1940s by an act of the Florida legislature. And after that time, the port was operated by a port authority. And then in 1976, the port became a department of the city of Pensacola, and that's how we operate today. We're a department of the city. For many, many years, this port was what's considered an operating port, which means that all of the labor that operates the cargo warehouses, that loads and unloads the ships, the stevedores, the longshoremen, the warehousemen, all of those employees were actually port employees for many, many, many years. And in the mid-1980s, we changed to a non-operating landlord type of port. So the port department today manages the docks, manages the warehouses, manages the infrastructure of the port, but all of the business activity that occurs on the port is all done by private industry.
So about 38 years it's been under the city.
That's correct.
Marketing. Well, it's grown, and you're going to talk a little bit about that. But I want to ask you one question about the commodities. Does the port currently handle? What type of commodities are your primary focus in?
This port has historically and traditionally serviced the local regional industry. So the materials that come in and go out through our port are really dictated by kind of our regional hinterland, kind of the Northwest Florida, Eastern Alabama, Southern Georgia, kind of shipping region. And so currently, that means that we bring in limestone aggregate rock from the Bahamas that goes into road and bridge building and construction projects all over the region. We bring in bulk cement that's used in the same types of construction activities. But in addition to that, we've got a service that runs to the Caribbean on a monthly basis that takes primarily export lumber to the Caribbean, and that's all lumber that's sourced from throughout the southeastern United States. And also carries paper product from our own international paper plant right here up the road in Cantonment. We've got a GE plant, General Electric wind manufacturing facility here in Pensacola that's just a few miles from the port. And so we also handle wind windmill, the technical name is wind turbine generator, but windmill components that are coming in to go to the GE plant. And then we handle finished windmill generator components going out as export product as well. But in addition to our cargo lines, one of our big lines here is the offshore oil and gas vessel services sector that we've just gotten into in the last 4 or 5 years or so, and that's been a very good business line for us that doesn't actually create cargo activity, but creates a lot of vessel and ship activity and a lot of jobs associated with it.
Tell us about this big ship behind us here. What are they doing here?
This ship is the Global 1200. It's an offshore oil and gas vessel services ship that is a pipe laying vessel. So it goes offshore into the Gulf of Mexico, takes on sections, 40-foot long sections of pipe that moves oil and gas on the floor of the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
And that pipe goes into the hold of the ship. There's then an assembly line in the belly of the ship where those sections are welded together, sealed, connected together, and then come out of the back of the ship and get dropped into the floor of the Gulf of Mexico as oil and gas pipeline.
I've seen that. You showed me the video last time I was here where they're actually releasing that pipeline into the ocean floor.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff to watch because these ships are so high tech that they're GPS controlled, and satellite navigation controlled, and so they, in order to lay that pipeline exactly where it needs to be, those ships are designed such that without being anchored, they never move more than 3 feet off of their center line in any direction.
I was
it's
going to ask
really
you about
high tech stuff.
That's interesting. How did the traditionally the oil and gas industries, Texas, Louisiana, how did the port of Pensacola assume some of these activities that are related to that industry?
You know, that whole industry is beginning to move east, and it's because a lot of the new leases for exploration in the Gulf of Mexico are in the eastern Gulf. Of course, Florida doesn't allow drilling in Florida state waters, but just outside of Florida state waters is where the new leases are available. It's where the deepest water is. Of course, now we're able to drill and harvest natural gas and oil from deeper in the ocean. So that positioned kind of ports in the eastern Gulf to become players in that market, where, as you said, historically the ships in this industry have gone to ports in Louisiana, Texas, and on the western end of the Gulf. So we kind of saw that starting to happen about 5 to 9 years ago, and just started kind of quietly kind of setting a foundation within the offshore oil and gas industry, you know, of, hey, when you're ready to move east, think of Pensacola. When you're ready to move east, think of Pensacola. And about 5 years ago, one of those vessel services companies did just that, a company called Offshore Inland Marine. And they operate this facility here at Pensacola, and they have other facilities throughout the Gulf and actually throughout the world. They have a facility in Mexico, they have a facility in Sri Lanka, and they have facilities throughout the Gulf of Mexico as well.
So you mentioned it's heading, that industry is heading east, so that sounds like you may generate even more interest and more activity as a result of what you now have here.
We absolutely expect to, and we really believe that this offshore oil and gas industry, in addition to the vessel services, what the vessel services entails is basically anytime one of these ships is getting ready to go out into the Gulf to do a project, there's certain materials and equipments and supplies that are related to that project. So all of that stuff comes into this port, gets loaded onto the ship. It goes out into the Gulf and completes the project, and when it comes back off of the project, there are leftovers that have to be taken off of the ship. So that all gets taken off of the ship, and if they have another project lined right up, they do the same thing over and over again. If they don't, these vessels on a fairly routine basis have to have topside maintenance and repair work done. They need all of their machinery and components have to be calibrated and tested and maintained. So all of that work gets done here as well. So we really believe that as this industry grows here at our port, that creates lots of opportunities in ancillary business lines, fabrication type businesses, small manufacturing, component repair type businesses. So we really see this as kind of a growing industry segment, not just for the Port of Pensacola, but for this region in terms of the economic activity that we hope it will create.
So you're seeing this diversification taking place, which has started maybe 5-6 years ago with the oil and gas industry. What other industries are prevalent at the port here that lease facilities from you?
Our primary lease tenants are, again, offshore inland in the oil and gas industry sector. Martin Marietta, which is a limestone aggregates importer, Cemex, which is a bulk cement importer, and then we have major shippers who are not necessarily lease tenants. They're general cargo shippers.
Right.
I talked about some of those,
Right.
GE, International Paper, folks like Weyerhaeuser, and the major lumber suppliers who operate on that export service to the Caribbean. But we have a new lease here at the port that is with a company called Deep Flex, and the lease is actually with Offshore Inland. Offshore Inland has a partnership with a company called Deep Flex, and in a new manufacturing plant that's under construction here at the port right now as we speak, they're going to be manufacturing the offshore oil and gas pipe. That will be used. It's a composite, flexible pipe that'll go out not just to projects in the Gulf of Mexico, but worldwide for use in harvesting natural gas and oil and transporting it on the ocean floor.
Well, now, Port of Pensacola is a small port, relatively speaking. How did you compete, and who did you compete with in order to get that project here?
That's a great question, and we're proud of the answer to that question. When Deep Flex was looking for where they were going to locate their very first manufacturing facility, actually, this is their first manufacturing plant. This is a newly trademarked, newly patented type of product, so it's a little bit different than any other kind of pipe that's currently in production. We really competed with pretty much every port on the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
And then that got narrowed down to a final 5 or 6. And I know that it was, Pensacola, Gulfport, Pascagoula were in that discussion for a while. And actually still a few of the ports in Texas were in the discussion as well. And then we made it down to the final 2, which was Pensacola and a port in Texas, who I won't name by name, but they're a little bigger than us, and so we were thrilled to be able to come away with the project at the end of the day. And it's great not just for the port because it provides cargo activity, vessel activity, and a lease facility revenue to the port. But that facility, when it's completely up and operating by about this time next year, will have 200 to 250 full-time permanent jobs, and those are new jobs in Pensacola, right in this downtown city of Pensacola, and they're manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing jobs that'll be, I say everything from blue collars to white jackets, because they'll have everything from security and production line and custodial, all the way up to engineers and product testers and quality assurance types of positions.
But the Port of Pensacola has always had an economic impact on the area. I won't say just Pensacola, but on the region. And in economic development, we promote the ports because we have Airbus coming in to the west of us here. How does that impact your strategy in terms of what might be a possibility of bringing in one of these suppliers that would use the port for some of the products that will be supplied to Airbus?
Yeah, we're absolutely working to position ourselves for the spin-off business that's going to come along with Airbus. Even though it's going to be just to the west of us and kind of the hub of activity will be to the west of us. You're absolutely right. A lot of the suppliers and vendors that are going to support that facility are looking for locations kind of in the outlying areas.
Yeah.
And I think Pensacola is ripe to take advantage of some of that. And of course, we're positioning the port for that. As you said, we're a relatively small port. We're 50 acres in land area. We have a little bit of land left for new development here at the port, but we're really looking at opportunities to kind of expand port operations inland. And are there opportunities for remote port terminals up closer to I-10? There's a couple of Superfund sites that are coming online here locally that the ultimate use of those is in discussion now. And so we've had some conversations about whether those make sense to be used as remote port terminals. Of course, we have Bayou Chico just to our west.
Yes.
That's a shallow harbor, can take barge activity. So we work closely with the ownership group of that facility about opportunities for us to partner with one another to support local industry. But I really do see the port as an economic development entity and an economic development tool. And at the end of the day, it's not about how many tons of cargo we push through necessarily, which is how ports traditionally are judged.
Yeah.
But it's about how many jobs do we create, and we're excited about the fact that, right now we have about roughly 100 full-time jobs here at the port. By this time next year, that will more than double, almost triple, actually more than triple, almost quadruple to over 300 total full-time jobs.
Wow.
And we just keep seeing that continue to grow and grow and grow.
Another year or two, will this create perhaps the greatest impact that this port has ever seen in terms of jobs and infrastructure improvements and actually expanding the full capabilities of this port?
I absolutely believe it is. I believe the Port of Pensacola really has turned a corner. I think we've really grabbed onto a business niche in the offshore oil and gas sector that's going to sustain us through the long term. Our mayor and our city council is the most supportive governmental administration I think we've had in many, many years for the port here. So everything's kind of clicking on all cylinders right now for the Port of Pensacola.
I would say that there is an economic developer that I know of that doesn't feel that same way, and particularly when the prospects that we deal with, whether they're domestic or international, ports are becoming more and more a viable factor in their decision-making process. So when we're out there marketing Northwest Florida, we're marketing your port, because with the new growth that you're experiencing now, this is helpful to us to say, by the way, we've got some new growth taking place at this port, and that makes them perk up to determine that, hey, things are going on in Northwest Florida, and maybe we should look a little closer at So you may see some of the Chambers folks and perhaps Northwest Florida folks coming here with prospects looking at your port and seeing if there's a way for them to utilize the capabilities that you have here. We didn't talk about the infrastructure yet. I'd like to focus a little bit tell us a little bit about the infrastructure, the depth of your port here, and what the capabilities are in terms of bringing in some of those bigger ships.
Sure. As I said, we're a 50-acre port facility. We have 5 deep draft docks. They are interestingly numbered 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. Nobody seems to know what happened to berth 4. And we have a number of general cargo warehouses, some of which are leased and some of which are still used as general cargo warehouses. Our channel, harbor, and docks are all dredged to 33 feet draft. And that's sufficient for us right now for the types of business that we handle. Of course, all the discussion when you talk about international trade these days is all centered around the Panama Canal and the expansion of the canal and the opening of the canal. We don't ever envision a time when 50-foot draft vessels carrying 13,000 containers are going to pull into Pensacola Harbor. That's just not the kind of port that we are. So our 33-foot draft is sufficient for us right now. We think that there may be an opportunity for us to go slightly deeper sometime in the future, maybe to 36, 38, 40 feet. But I don't really see a need for us to go much deeper than that, really. And so I think we're positioned to continue in the offshore oil and gas vessel services sector, which is our real primary focus. I think we're positioned well to continue in moving break bulk non-containerized cargo, which is our other primary focus. And then I think we're also in that depth in a position that if there is some spin-off business from the opening of the canal, some of the smaller feeder ships, that folks are talking about, where these big 13,000 TEU ships will go to hubs in the Caribbean or in Miami or other places, and then that cargo gets unloaded to smaller feeder vessels that would distribute that product inland to ports further inland, such as Pensacola. I think we're in a good position to capture that business. So that's really kind of where our focus is kind of in that sweet spot, just under the major container port areas. You know, when it comes to the canal opening, I think it's really a great time to not be a major container port, because it's going to be dog eat dog in that world. It's you know, the East Coast ports and the West Coast ports that are currently handling that business are not going to let it go away without a fight.
Are you targeting any other types of cargo from other ports that, let's say, you know, I mean, I know with your history being involved in part of the port, there may be other ports that look attractive to you in terms of what commodities they're handling. Plus, maybe a comment about your neighboring ports.
You know, I really would prefer not to talk about specific cargo types that we might be going after, because that kind of tends to tip off your competition a little bit to what you're doing, and we try to hold those things pretty close to the vest. But I do think there are opportunities as some of the ports who are geographically close to Pensacola begin to change their focus, that some of their, as they begin to diversify and they begin to go into different cargo lines and cargo sectors, some of their traditional business may be displaced, and we see some of that happening. I don't want to talk about specifics again. Sure. So that's what we look for, is opportunities where not necessarily geographically close in terms of within 50 miles or 100 miles, but within the Gulf region, for example. A port that has traditionally been maybe a stronger breakbulk port that's really building toward containerization, really wants to change their focus into the containerized cargo trades. Where are their traditional breakbulk, non-containerized cargo customers going to go? And so those are the kinds of opportunities I look for. You know, here in Northwest Florida, we have the advantage of having a port network. The whole state of Florida, for that matter, has a fantastic port network with 15 ports in the state. We all work very well together. We try not to compete head-to-head for business. We try to respect each other's strengths, so that there's enough to go around for everyone. And I think we do that very, very successfully here in Northwest Florida between Pensacola and Port of Panama City. Wayne Stubbs at the Port of Panama City is a good friend of mine, and he and I have known each other for many, many years. And there are things that the Port of Panama City does very well that frankly aren't tailored to a port like Pensacola, and vice versa. And there are things that we both do and do successfully. You know, I mentioned earlier that we've got this pipe manufacturing plant that's being built here at the Port of Pensacola, and that we're big in the offshore oil and gas vessel services sector. Well, Wayne has some of that same business at Panama City. He's got Berg Steel Pipe, he's got Oceaneering, he's, you know, so our port network in Northwest Florida and in the state of Florida in general, I think, is very strong, and it's very attractive to shippers, particularly shippers who are trying to ship product from or to kind of the middle America region, kind of the heartland region. You know, we really see kind of our sweet spot being kind of up to Nashville, kind of up the, you know, of course the I-10 corridor, east and west, but up the I-70, I-71 corridor, staying away from that I-75 corridor in South and Central Florida, and kind of reaching into Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, the Ohio River Valley, some of that area. And so that plays well with what Pensacola does, but also with what Panama City does, because Panama City's position allows them to play in that business as well, but also allows them to reach further east and further south than Pensacola, just by nature of geography.
Interesting. So you're actually complimentary to the Port of Panama City. I have one last question, since we're just about out of time, and that has to do with one other aspect of infrastructure, and that's your rail here.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your rail right here, and I know how critical that is to ports. Tell us how that impacts your strategy in attracting other customers too.
It's very important for us. CSX is our mainline rail service provider right into the gate of the port. We have an abundance of on-dock rail here, which makes us very attractive for what in the industry is called project cargo. It's cargo that's for a specific contract or a specific project. One example of that is we ship a lot of brand new coal rail cars that are being shipped to South America, to Colombia for the coal trade. And of course, having this abundance of on-dock rail is very beneficial to that because it comes in on rail, it can sit on our on-dock rail, and then get loaded on to export ship. So we're always looking for opportunities to tie our rail infrastructure into our import-export business.
Do you see an increase in rail usage today as opposed to, let's say, 5 years ago?
It's about the same today as it has been, but I think as we begin to develop inland port activity, as I talked about earlier, rail will become more and more important for us.
Absolutely. Well, my time is out. Amy, thank you so much. Amy Miller, Port Director for the Port of Pensacola, and I'm your host, Larry Sassano, Florida's Great Northwest. This has been great and educational to me as well. I always enjoy coming out and doing an outside type of a taping with Cox, and having that kind of a background is pretty unique, so kind of special. So thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thank you.